Now, speaking of work, you are currently working as a production coordinator at a TV production company.
Yeah,
Is this a job that feels meaningful for you, or would you rather do something else?
that's a tough question. Uh, I don't know. I am constantly trying to figure that out. It's not that it's not meaningful.
Hmm.
I do like working on shows, and I tend to work on kid shows. So right now I'm at an animation studio, and that's all very important to me. But I'm still trying to figure out like if this is what I want to be doing.
Have you worked on like any shows that we might know, or
Um,
that you
the
can
new
say?
the new Blues Clues.
Oh, really? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, the one with the
with Josh. Yeah,
Josh.
he's excellent. A gem.
Oh my god. So, what is sort of the extent of what you do as a project coordinator or production coordinator, and it's specifically maybe on Blue's Clues?
Um, honestly, so most of what I do, like Josh is of course like live action, but most of
Hmm.
the show is animation. So most of what I do is I look at schedules. I ask if animators are going to be able to draw stuff on time. Uh, they're not because the deadlines are pretty tight. And then I tell producers and other higher ups that it's not going to happen. And then I like repeat. And then I cry for a bit. And then I repeat again. Pretty much how production goes anywhere.
So you're working on the sort of back end of the production. Um,
Yeah.
have you always wanted to be involved with like the more kid friendly animation, or are you looking to transition to something else?
Nah, kids or nothing. When I think about like things that have influenced me, things that have helped me get through tough times, and like a lot of the things that like make us who we are,
Hmm.
it's like from when I was a kid. So I knew that I wanted to like make the world better, sort of,
Hmm.
and that like pushed me into kids TV.
So I'm assuming that must mean that you've had these gems that you grew up with that were super inspirational to you. For me, like I remember always having a fondness to Hey Arnold,
Yeah,
and obviously I grew up with like Rugrats, but I think um, shows like Hey Arnold or Doug that were really about like sort of a lonely kid who was very contemplative and always like dreaming up different schemes and trying to help people, like that was really influential to me. For you, what were the pivotal shows growing up?
uh, Sailor Moon is always the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, the shows that you mentioned, Hey Arnold, Doug, Recess. It's funny. I think we're in some ways really lucky to be growing up watching TV in the '90s
Hmm.
because it felt like they were trying to be more diverse and do better, but they weren't like mad at us for them trying to do better yet.
Yeah,
So we had a lot more. I feel like it was like easy
it was like
to get more
optimistic and
Yeah, like a bit more representation sometimes. Even things like Magic School Bus, which were also I've been working a bit on the new Magic School Bus, but the old Magic School Bus too was like a big thing for me growing up.
is there a certain type of um show that you have in mind, like, oh, I really want to be able to work on this type of project? Because I think for a lot of people who want to work on various whether you're working on film or TV shows, um, there's always the work that you have to do for work, and then there's also the project that in your mind you're like, oh, but I really want to scratch that itch and do that
Yeah,
thing. Like, what would you say is the project that you'd really want to take on?
that is a good question. Um, ooh, I don't know. I think about it a lot. I just want to be like I want TV to be hella black and hella gay and all that stuff. So like something like that. Like even though I want like kids TV shows,
Hmm.
I look at like Issa Rae's show and I'm like that must be so fun to work on. Or mm, but yeah, I don't know. I'm currently doing a bit of work for this show that just started to air on PBS
Hmm.
called Xavier and the Secret Museum, and
Oh.
it's not like perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really trying to. I mean, PBS shows in general always really try to like make the world a better place, and
Yeah.
I think it's really trying and doing a pretty good job of trying to be like diverse and show different people throughout. It's a show that has time travel,
Mm-hmm.
and it has like they try to show a lot of different people throughout history. So I like more like that, but like owned or created by POC. Like just like a POC completely led show would be the dream, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, you know, we've seen over the years different shows come and go that want to represent different, you know, different communities, whether it's like, all right, so now we're gonna have an Asian show, or now we're gonna have a Latino show.
Yeah.
And I wrote about this earlier about how at first, like when you're talking about representation, um, we just want it to be there. Like we just want
Yes.
something there, and then once it's there, then we have the task of mulling over, like, okay, but is this a good form of representation? Like, could we do this better? And that's why I think it's interesting, like, Issa Rae's show, where it's like that, like you can start to see the spectrum now of, okay, this is this is the range of possibility if we really allow ourselves to be as authentic as possible, to not have to worry about whether or not production teams are going to be concerned if this is going to offend our audiences because they're not going to get this cultural reference or whatever. Like, just really creating content for a community and not trying to pander to anybody else.
Yeah. 100%.
Now, another thing that you worked on recently is a podcast called "What If They Had Friends." Can you tell us, what that's about and sort of the interest that you have that led to the creation of that podcast?
Yeah, okay. So my side project that I do like outside of work is What If They Had Friends? And it's this podcast where me and a friend, and it's different friends each episode,
Mm-hmm.
but me and a friend will look at a moment in pop culture or a moment in history and talk about how that moment might have been different if the person at the center of it had like a real friend. So the example I always give is Juliet from Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
If Juliet had a friend, the entire thing would be like the entire play would be totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Even if she had a bad friend, it would still be totally different. So yeah, what the way the format works is we watch the movie or a TV show or sometimes like a biopic, just something we consume something about the topic, eat wine or drink wine, eat cheese,
Mm-hmm.
and just then go over each pivotal moment and how we think it would be different if we were there to like be their friends.
And is there a particular character that you touched on in one of your podcasts that you really enjoyed, or one that sort of sticks out for you?
Okay, this is low key embarrassing, but Bella from Twilight.
Okay.
She
How
has
how would that change?
she has high school classmates, but she doesn't really have friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay. I understand that the source isn't. Um, the source has plot holes, of course. So like, regardless of whether she has friends or not, there are some moments where you're like, hmm. But just everything that Edward does is super creepy. And if she had her friends, like real friends who were invested in her life, uh, she wouldn't have been alone with him for very long ever. And I feel like it would have been more like a vampire hunting show, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And just there's little things like uh, he has. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Twilight.
Not that familiar at all.
So one of the other vampires in his like vampire family,
Uh-huh.
like, was a Confederate soldier when he
Oh,
was a human.
ooh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and like nobody really brings up any of their poor life choices when they were like alive, let alone what they're doing now.
Uh-huh.
And I just feel like those would have been more interesting discussions.
Like if someone at least had like a second opinion, like, maybe that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and I think what makes Bella from Twilight stand out so much is even with this creepy Confederate soldier vampire, uh, Twilight is this interesting book, and I mean no shade to Stephanie Meyer, but Twilight is this interesting book where almost every single character, besides the two main ones, besides Bella and Edward, have really interesting backstories,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of like, what's happening there? But she only ever hints at it, and then we're back to Bella being bored in Forks.
So what was sort of the inspiration for making a podcast based on this? Is this something that you think that you um, constantly notice whenever you're watching films or TV shows that like, hey, these people are making stupid decisions. Like maybe if this happened, maybe if they had that friend, they'd be snapped out of it. Because I know that a lot of people sometimes will do this, like when it comes to scary movies. Like, oh my gosh, like why are you running that way? What was sort of the idea that sparked all this?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. Like I was just watching something. It was probably Romeo and Juliet because that was like our first episode. But I was watching something and I was like, oh, I would have done everything differently, and like so would all of my friends. And I think because I work in animation and in television production, I'm friends with like a lot of creative types of people, and like I have friends that have written like fanfics when we were like when we were teenagers and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just another form of like, it just seemed like this podcast kind of just came to me and it seemed like a great creative outlet. Like it's basically collaborative fan fiction when you get down to it. Like we're reimagining the story if we were in it, or if we recreate other characters who are in it. And I think because in television, like you spend a lot of time working on other people's ideas,
Mm-hmm.
it's just nice to take a look at some of the stuff and add your own influence.
And be able to sort of just create this sort of alternative perspective to how things might have played out. And
Yeah, and it was interesting. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm looking at schedules at work,
mm-hmm.
and uh, in Toronto there was this really cool initiative called Sounding Out, where these people ran a workshop for like young youth, people under 30 of color,
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to podcast. So I took the workshop, and I was like, this seems like a great way to combine those two like skills.
So how has the podcasting process been for you? I know that in the last few years, the amount of people um, who have started a podcast and who have gotten into the space has really increased. I mean, granted, the podcasting industry has expanded due to like smart home technology and voice activated technology. Do you enjoy the podcasting process? What was sort of the most difficult thing for you?
Yeah, no, I really enjoy it. I starting with okay, so like I guess the most difficult thing would either be like just learning how to edit a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think that my background in TV helped with that. I've never had to edit a cartoon, but I've often been in editing suites watching them do their things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just like using the software, and it's so hard to cut it down. Like most people apparently only listen to like 22 minutes of a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so trying to, it's been a very, it's been a very good process of like just basically like writing and editing and like trying to keep it down to the sweet spot of 22 minutes. I've never succeeded at 22 minutes, but I'm getting down there. Um, and then the other hard thing that I would have to say, especially lately,
Mm-hmm.
would be like access to like spaces and equipment and stuff.
Yeah.
When I first started doing this podcast, I was living in an apartment on a quieter street,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like bigger, and I just had more space to like find a quiet room. But I don't know if you're uh, that familiar. Well, rent control in Toronto is pretty much as shitty as it is everywhere else. Like Toronto and BC, Vancouver, BC are probably like the worst in Canada. Like they're probably the equivalent of like New York and uh, San Francisco.
How much is it on average to live around there for like maybe like a one bedroom?
I saw on the news it was something like 2,300 a month. Yeah, and minimum wage is 14 something.
Damn.
So we're gonna have $15 in this province. We're gonna have $15, but the government sucks, and we're like no. And then we had rent control, sort of like older apartment buildings have. They used to have a 1.8% cap on how high you could raise it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's gone up to 2.2. And if you're in a newer building, there's no rent control.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
So a lot
So
of people being like pushed out and moving
very,
out.
very much so. So like we got. Do you have the term "renovicted" in where you are?
Renovicted.
Okay, so in Ontario, I don't know how much of this is like specific to Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
but there are supposed to be certain ways, like certain protections for people like us who are renting, um, so that landlords can't just kick you out willy
Mm-hmm.
nilly. But one of the ways they get around this is they say they're renovating,
Mm-hmm.
and so you have to leave because they're renovating. But really, they're just like saying they're going to renovate and then like up the rent.
Mm. So they're basically just like buying out time and saying, well, this thing's gonna happen, and we don't know when it's gonna happen, so you might want to move out, and it essentially just gives them that window of opportunity to go, okay, well, we're gonna fix a couple things, and now rent's gonna be like $1,000 more.
Yeah, and that's it was exactly like, so the place we were staying at last time was 1,000. It was like I think it was like 1,900 because it was 950 for two people each. Like each person was paying 950.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I looked at it recently, because I saw that there was a listing, it was 2,700,
Oh my
and I was
gosh.
like, wow. So we moved to a much smaller apartment, but like I'm right by a train track, and there's no, like, we don't have a table in our apartment. Like it's very small.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so just having the space to podcast uh, has been tricky. Certain libraries will have studios, luckily,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, that's, I feel like now more than ever, it's just the difficulties of podcasting is like just access to like time, resources, time, and space to like do the podcast.
Yeah, and that's another thing that a lot of times uh folks forget about, the challenges of starting a podcast, like for everything from access to equipment, to having a space that's quiet. I mean, that's a luxury that sometimes we don't even realize is a luxury, which is being able to have access to a quiet space. Um, especially for people who live in cities, it's even more difficult, obviously. But um, yeah, it can be really difficult because you just always have this feeling like, well, I'm never going to be able to do anything because if there's always going to be that train track noise, or if there's always going to be like cars honking, like then I have to sort of delay this project that I really want to do.
Yeah.
So another subject that you and I sort of have a shared fascination for, is temporary work and sort of the universe of side gigs. For as much as I love the independence of being able to have my own schedule, I think the tricky thing of working a lot of these side gigs, especially when you do it for so long, is you start to develop a perpetual anxiety of joblessness. And
Yeah.
you're always thinking about this, like, what am I going to do next? What's going to happen after that? How long is this going to last? Like, what's it been like for you? What kinds of side jobs have you had, and how has this process been like for you?
Yeah, it was, well, it's very common in television because most people, uh, most people who work in animation aren't salaried. They're just contract from show to show. So if you're working on like season two of BoJack, you're good for like, let's say like 11 months, and then it's like, where's the next one? I don't know if BoJack did 11 months. I just pulled it up, but
Mm-hmm.
like, uh, so Uh, so there's a lot, like, even when you just have your full time job, there's a lot of just, when's my next gig? Am I gonna have money? Can I plan ahead? And I've done a lot of side gigs. I do a lot of babysitting and pet sitting.
Mm-hmm.
gigs. Do you guys have Rover?
Rover, what is that?
It's a dog walking app for iPhones, and people get to,
Oh,
it's like Uber but for dog walkers. It's very
okay.
weird. But I've walked a lot of dogs. Uh, I've done face painting parties, which is really fun because I'm not a visual artist. Like,
Uh-huh.
I don't have those skills, but I can get a kid to sit still. So, like, someone who's a visual artist and my face paint will be on par because, like, they can do really talented things, but my kid's sitting still. So I do a
Oh,
lot of face painting.
cool. So
Yeah.
you've it seems like you've done like a huge range of different work. Are there some that are better than others?
Uh, Anything that's cash, because then you don't have to worry about taxes and stuff. But
Yeah.
especially because right now, I don't think I mentioned this to you, but my partner doesn't have status in the country,
Mm-hmm.
so like a lot of our money has to be under the table until he gets uh his permanent residency,
Mm-hmm.
like a green card. And so like yeah, any of those, I'll take up a lot of editing jobs, like a lot of like just copy editing and proofreading.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, For a while, I was a mall elf. Not this Christmas season, but other Christmas seasons past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, it seems like you have so many different talents that you're able to go from, something as different as dog walking all the way to babysitting and copy editing. Um, but I think part of the anxiety, especially here in America, with our terrible healthcare,
yep.
is a lot of us are can't even afford to afford for the basic services of just getting a checkup. Um, and it seems like we're both sort of in the same boat of like how how expensive is rent, and the fact that most people just cannot afford. I mean, like when you're talking about a a rental price of like 2,700, it's like who, like, you're setting a price like that, you're really making a point about who you think should live there,
Yes.
because there's only certain people who are going to be able to afford something like that comfortably. And unfortunately, this pushes out a lot of people, not even just if we're talking about race and we're talking about people of color who are being excluded from a lot of these neighborhoods, but you're also talking about excluding a lot of different professions and a lot of people of different industries. And I think it's so it's interesting how even if we're talking about entertainment and people who are actors or people who are in production, um, there's always this misconception that you work on a big project, you're working on a big name, like, oh my gosh, like you're working on this show, they think that you're rich. But a lot of these jobs, like you were saying, like they're for a certain period of time, and then
Yeah.
within that space, like if you're working on a project for 11 months, the next 5 months you have to worry about where you're going to be able to supplement your income from. So it's like side jobs are, it's great that we have so much access to quote quick money and some of these jobs, but it's so unfortunate that a lot of people are starting to feel like they can't find a stable job at all, and now side gigs are the only thing that they can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, we do not obviously, but we have better healthcare than you. But shout out to Canada, I guess. But it is one of those things. Like, so my current gig, it's good to go for like a good while, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody likes to talk about how Canada's healthcare. Well, everybody here likes to talk about how our healthcare is so good, but I think it's because we're comparing it to you guys. Like the
Yeah.
bar can't. That's like a constant problem of Canada. Is like
Uh-huh.
we are always comparing ourselves to you, but then
Uh-huh.
we always like pat ourselves on the back for like not good shit. Like at least
uh,
we're not as racist as the U.S. And it's like actually we are, and why is that your bar? And like our healthcare is better than the U.S. But I have work benefits, so like
mm-hmm.
because of work benefits, uh I can afford like my asthma medicine, and I can afford like we still have dispensary fees, and not everything is covered, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like still like a constant stress. And then like like I said, with my partner, like he doesn't have healthcare right now because he doesn't have status. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like he hit his head the other day, like just like a bump on his head, and he got like the anxiety kicked in because it was like, what do I do if it's a concussion? What do I do if it's
Mm-hmm.
like that? It 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 like freezes you as I freeze on the spot, like that kind of like stress and anxiety. But and then yeah, with this podcast and like some of my other like side projects, it's one of those things where like you feel like you should, I don't know, I feel like I always have to put it like it's always going to be last on the priority list
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Mm-hmm.
something I do that's like art for fun and it
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't really make money.
Uh-huh.
And we're always, I don't know, like I don't know about you, but like when you get home after like work or after doing like a side gig, like I'll look around and be like, okay, so what's the next thing I can do to like bring in some cash flow rather than like sit and enjoy
Oh
anything.
my gosh. Yeah. And like that's what I was sort of talking about, this perpetual anxiety of like sometimes you feel like you can't relax and you feel guilty even for taking time for yourself because you keep thinking to yourself like, well, this bill's due. Like, why am I like, how can I deserve to sit down and watch this show when I could be working on this and when I could be working on that? And like, it's put me in this weird situation where on one hand, like I have this, I guess you can say dream of, or whatever, of like having a podcast and churning out content and it being successful and whatnot. But on the other hand, I'm thinking to myself like, is that also just another one of these parts of myself that's saying, hey, I need to work on this so I can have another possible steady flow of income, or like
Yeah.
something that could be a refuge from the 9 to 5. And so like it just this feeling of like I have to work, I have to be working. Why not? How come I'm not working? And like, and sometimes I I find it hard to relax and just hard to finish shows or finish anything because I'm just like that's constantly on my mind. And even though I have a more stable job right now, like I don't know if it's just the residue of being in that situation for so long, or that's just the byproduct. Maybe working in social media and having these different platforms, like you're just constantly worrying about this.
Yeah, and I don't know, I think we have been spun so many like capitalist narratives that it's hard to figure out how much of it is me and how much of it is like legit. Like um you see it, well, okay. Do you know the podcast My Favorite Murder?
It sounds familiar though, but keep going.
It's these two white girls. It's an interesting podcast,
Mm-hmm.
but they talk about murders. Um and it's really successful. But for the first like little while, um I remember like it felt like they were just these two gals that were talking about murder and making it like and were interesting, and it felt like it organically like took off, like it got popular, and like that's how like it's just because the story like resonated
Mm-hmm.
with people. And I'm not saying that that's not the case, but what I hadn't really realized is the two hosts, like they both have like really successful television careers. Like one of them was a
Mm-hmm.
host of a TV show, the other one has been like a writer and like done production work like on the
They're
back
like
end of
already
like,
connected and
yeah, and like okay, so to do this interview with you and to do my podcast, I borrow this microphone from a friend at the studio I work at, and
mm-hmm.
I borrow it from them every time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great. But like microphones are expensive, and if
Yeah.
I didn't have that, and like the production value on their podcast has always been really good. Like they'll laugh and say that it wasn't, but like it is always going to be miles away from what like the average person is starting with
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they're not starting at ground zero. And so, but and I don't think this is unique to them. I think a lot of popular podcasts like happen to have people who have like real connections to entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like in our heads, we're like, oh, well, if I'm doing this podcast, I should be able to monetize it. But I like, is that because I think sometimes it's just because so often we're like shown these stories of people who monetized out of nowhere as if they weren't.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
and it's like what's happening to this sort of gold rush of podcasting, like this second wave gold rush of podcasting, reminds me of so much of what happens to a lot of different platforms, where they're talking about Instagram or YouTube, where there's this rush of people going to these platforms, and a lot of them are easy to start off, and you look up YouTube videos like how to start a podcast, and you see that the actual like guts of shooting and interviewing, and like the actual steps themselves aren't very difficult, but the nuanced things within it, like the recording equipment that you have, the whether or not you can do video, whether or not you have people who can actually um, edit them for you, because so many of uh, these podcasts, like a lot of them look really well produced and really simple, but then you go on the back end and you realize it's even more complex. Like there are researchers and writers and editors, and you're just like, does my podcast of a production team of one or two people, like, can I like, do I stand a chance? And like, it's, I mean, I know that podcasting has been pretty corporatized for a really long time, but I think, speaking to your point, like on one hand there is this allure that anybody can do it. Anybody can really take a phenomenal idea, and as long as it's executed well enough, and if it's interesting enough, and your episodes are interesting enough, and if your guests are interesting enough, then it's just going to hit.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like, you go through this process of like, okay, I'm posting, I'm editing, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do, but like, where are the results? No one's watching. Where's the money from the monetization? And so sometimes you're just like, is this for me? And it can be discouraging sometimes.
I try really hard for What If They Had Friends to just remind myself that I'm doing this because it's fun. It's like a fun storytelling exercise. So like I've taken a break from it for a bit. It's not over. Like I'm still gonna do episodes. I'm taking a break till I can like find the right space slash till my partner gets permanent residency, so I can like really like do it without stressing. Um, but I try really hard to like just remind myself that like there's no set schedule. I'm not making money on this, so it doesn't, like, I don't have to stress about it. Like I don't have to internalize the stress I take to all my other projects and put it to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, it's just not gonna be. There's millions of podcasts out there, and I'm sure there's another person out there doing a very similar concept to me. So I just try to like really, like, this is the thing I really try to hold on to as like a fun project. Yeah.
Yeah, just something like you can, and that's what I'm trying to learn to do as well, because like, I think that one of the troubles with being someone who likes to do different creative work is you always want to scratch that creative itch, but then there's always a part of you that's also asking like, like, can I make money off of this? And so you're, unfortunately, art just doesn't pay. Art is something that is, for so many people, it's a pivotal aspect of their life. It's something that's very therapeutic, but something that doesn't pay, and there's oftentimes a discouragement of people who get into art and being able to express themselves creatively, which sort of leads me into my next question. As a creative person, I think we all have different visions of what we see as an ideal workplace. And for me, I would love to work at a flexible office environment where I can take my work anywhere, so long as I get my shit done. I'd love to be able to have the flexibility to work remote, but also possibly have an office that I can go to just in case I want to be able to work. For you, working in these different environments, working on all these different projects, how would you describe your ideal working situation?
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Definitely what you were saying, like flexible hours, The ability to work from home is a big thing for me, which I didn't know it was a big thing for me until I started doing it from time to time. And then I was like, oh, I'm so much more productive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, and like what I was saying earlier, like wanting to work on a show like Issa Rae, or like even like when you hear people talk about what it was like to work on Black Panther, like um, I think as long as I'm in television or on the creative field, the goal would be like an all, like yeah, like an all or majority like POC um crew and cast, even just because like I think, and I love a lot of the projects I've worked on. I love a lot of the people I've worked with, but it would be nice to like, it would, I mean, this might be stating the obvious, and this might not be possible in like my lifetime, but it would be nice to like go to work and not deal with like microaggressions.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to like, especially when we're talking about like working in media and like being a part of the people that are trying to like, I don't know, do diverse shows or uh like put things out there for kids. It would be nice if like the world we're trying, or the world I'm trying to create for kids on screen, could be like matched in the office a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is like a big thing for me one day. Like, yo, maybe I'll get my US green card and head over to Tyler Perry Studios. I don't know what that would be like, but like that would, I think that would be my ideal right now. Even if I had to give up working from home, I think that would be my ideal.
Yeah, it's always a weird back and forth where you have a job and for the first few days or first few weeks it's like this honeymoon phase and you're like, oh my god, I love it, it's so different, it's so new. And then as you sort of settle into week 4 and week 12, you're like, oh gosh, like there's just so many problems, there's all this shit going on. And having worked since I was 17,
Yep.
I haven't found a working environment that I've absolutely loved, where it's like, okay, this is exactly what I want. And I guess one of the topics that I've been sort of thinking about is like, how do I feel about work in general? Like, like one thing that I've thought about is, I had these visions of getting into advertising, and I had this vision of like what the job would be like. Oh, I'd be, meeting people and working on all these cool projects, but then like the actual lived experience of doing it feels like a grind, just like any other jobs. And then you start to feel like, man, like, is this what I wanted? Like, if I keep going on this path, knowing how busy it makes me, like, am I going to be okay with this? Like, would I have been more satisfied being a farmer or something like that? Like, and I, I'm 29, and I guess I'm sort of ending the decade and really thinking about like, for a lot of us who chose our careers really early on, whether it's like early high school or college or whatever, like now it's sort of this time to think like, was this all worth it? Am I actually going on this path that I that I set out for myself?
Do you see, I don't mean to be like flipping the interview on you, but like,
No, good.
do you see your career like, is that the like a is your career a big part of your life?
See, that's the thing, is like, I feel like I had been working at it for so long, because I remember um being a freshman in college, and you know um I was so confused about what I wanted to do. Originally I wanted to be a fashion designer, and I was trying to get into the art institute, but tuition's like over $100,000, so I couldn't afford it to go in. um but then I realized that advertising would be a great way for me to express myself, because I chose advertising because I like writing, but I also like visual arts, and I figured advertising would be a great way for me to meld those two and also potentially make some decent money. Um, And so I kind of just had that goal tacked up, in my mental vision board, and I was just always chipping away at it and always just trying to find work that would slowly push me closer and closer and closer to it. And so having worked on it since I was like 18, 19 years old, and now 10 years into it, and I, just this year I finally broke into the advertising industry. It's just a really weird experience of like, oh, okay, so that goal that I had set, I've achieved it now, but like, how do I actually feel about it? And like, part of me is like, I want to say that that's part of my identity and a part of me that I feel proud about, but at the other hand, like, I know that that's not all that there is to me, and I feel weird attributing such a large chunk of my personality just to a job at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And like, it was kind of funny. I was in VR, and I was on this program called AltSpace VR, and there was a little event where you can like meet people, and I met someone, and one of the questions that they asked was, what's something that you're really proud about yourself? And as someone who has a platform, and I have a bunch of followers, and I've been doing this for a really long time. When he asked that, like, what am I proud about? I just said that I'm proud of my writing, but I didn't necessarily feel proud of the work that I've done. And I guess it just speaks to like the larger topic of like, what the hell are all these dreams that we have that we set out for ourselves? Like, one of the things that I've been really imploring within myself is like, why do we aspire for certain positions? Why do we aspire for certain lifestyles where we're like, oh, I want to be rich and be a millionaire, and like, where do these things come from, and like, why does it push us in so many different ways? I feel really weird about my career. I think I'm still trying to figure myself out.
Yeah, me too. I'm also 29, and I
Mhm.
think, I think a big I'm not the first to say this for sure, but like, I think a big thing is like, our whole lives we were asked like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mhm.
Like, our whole lives were like, before we like started them, were connected to what our career would be. And so, like, yeah, I go to the office, I look at these schedules. Sometimes I get to make a difference. I've also like worked at jobs where like I had more creative say. Like, I used to work in television development, which is like, if you had a show idea, you would pitch it to a development team first,
Mhm.
like of the company. And like, that was taxing in its own ways. And I'm very much at the point now where I'm like, okay, is there a job where I could be doing similar things now, like administration work? Like, could I be somebody's receptionist, or could I be somebody's secretary? It's the same thing, but like, could I do some kind of like coordinating job that is proper 9 to 5, but like has more stability, and like, if it's not like the things I dreamed about, would that make me happier? Because then I could like go home to a place I could afford, uh, make a podcast without like make a
Mhm.
podcast without worrying about it. Like, I'm very much in this place like, do I want to just drop everything and get
Yeah.
some kind of job? Like, I don't even know if these jobs exist, but in my head, you could be like, in my head, I picture like, if I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, maybe. I don't know. They
Mhm.
probably don't get paid enough either. But like, could I do that? And then like, just would I have the energy and resources to be creative? Like, is that a thing that could happen? I don't know.
Yeah, like, and that's why I sometimes battle with just thinking about like I feel like I want something different. I feel like I want a particular job that will afford a certain lifestyle, but even that, I'm like, you know, like, I think just the overall question of like, what is really going to make me happy? Like, what situation do I have to be in to be able to finally feel like okay, where I don't have this perpetual anxiety of like, okay, like, is this the right thing? Am I on this right path? And like, sometimes you hear people who feel so sure of where they are in life, and and you're like, oh, like I at least want that.
Yeah.
And I think over the years I mean, when I was younger, I used to really want to be, oh my God, I want to be so rich. I want to have like a really big house, and you know, but as I've gotten older, I think what really matters to me is just being able to enjoy my time and being able to, maybe have a quiet space of my own. Like I really don't want all this crap. But I think the thing that really stands in the way is finding work. I think it's just sort of the inevitable. Like a particular work environment can make everything better or fuck everything up.
Yeah.
And I think that's just what so many of us are in this position of, is just like we're dealing with horrible, shitty work conditions, and it makes it harder to do anything else.
Yep.
So, last week I spoke with Ricardo Wolfolk from who runs a sports podcast, and we were discussing how organizations like the NFL have, for example, black men as the face of an organization, even though the team, the owners and the managers, and everyone sort of on the top level, executive level, they all profit from the NFL. All of them are predominantly white. As someone who works in TV production, what do you think is the logic of these white executives when it comes to firing people who are outspoken, like, say, for example, Gabrielle Union or Orlando Jones? I know that's something that we sort of touched on earlier.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and of course, with those two examples right now, particularly, I always think. Remember the Kendall Jenner Pepsi
Oh,
commercial?
yeah. Oh,
I always
God.
think about, I always think about like the black people or person. Let's be real here. The black person who works in Pepsi's marketing department. Like I always think about them, and I think about like I was like, I feel like I know them. I don't know who they are, but I feel like I know them so well. Just like having to sit there while like Pepsi comes up with this like idea and like not being able to say that it's not a good idea.
Like what
I feel
it's
like,
like to stick your neck out in like
well,
a.
like, yeah, like, we'll stick your neck out for sure, but also like, because I feel like a lot of us go through this moment where you stick your neck out once and then you kind of stop because
Mm-hmm.
uh I once I once worked for this company, and they pitched a show. They pitched a show. It was a cartoon show, and they pitched it to a broadcaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the show, I'm trying to just be very vague, but like the show had like two main characters, and then like it felt like a lot, but like eight other characters, and like they
Mm-hmm.
were all on the cover of the document, like the character designs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't at this meeting. Like, I wasn't at the pitch. I wasn't important enough to be at the pitch. But they came back after the pitch with this document where all the character designs were on the cover. And they were like, Amelia, do you see this? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, did you know that all of these characters are white? And I was like, in my head, I was like, this is a trap. But there's no way to answer it because the designs are on the cover. Like,
Uh-huh.
yes, they're all white,
Mm-hmm.
but like you could see it, they could see it. Like I was unaware that I was on this project that was not mine, like that I had not touched. I was unaware that I was the one that was supposed to be like, by the way, all like eight characters are white. Um,
So did he
and
like expect you to be the lone voice to sort of.
yeah, because I was like, eventually, I like looked at my boss and I was like, yes, they are all white. And I gave a pause because I didn't know how to answer. But and they were like, why didn't you say anything? We need you to tell us these things. Blah 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 blah. And again, like all of these characters, you designed them. Like
Yeah.
you gave the designer notes. Like like you yeah. Um Ironically, one of the characters was supposed to be Asian, but
Mhm.
they didn't look Asian. But they did have purple hair, and I should have
Oh.
known. I should have known. Um, but it was wild, and I often think about that moment because later on, thing is, there were so many moments, and I forget what happened. But there was something that I was like really uncomfortable with, and like it was just like too racist. I mean, you think I would remember it, but there's been some moments that I can't. But I remember this is when I was like in my earlier 20s too.
Mhm.
And so I remember I brought it up with HR, but it was like I brought it like I remember I went to HR and I was like, how do I handle this situation? Like, how do I talk to my boss to explain this thing? And HR was like, you just tell them, like just tell them that it's racist. And I was like, okay. So like I went and I didn't get a chance to do it because HR did it. But then I got in trouble for going to HR. Like,
What?
yeah, everything's ridiculous. And I got like chewed out for 2 days. I like cried a lot because I was like, I don't understand how this happened this way. I was just like lost. HR went on vacation, so like I didn't even
Oh my
have like
gosh.
I was
You
like,
didn't even have
okay,
anyone to
cool.
like stand up for you.
Yeah, I don't think they would have, but like I was just like, I don't know what to do here. And after that time, like that was I switched to do just production work, which is like my opinion matters less. Like my job is to like make sure shit gets done on time and that it looks right, but like I don't have any hands in the early creative process.
Mhm.
And sometimes that like sucks because like you always want to have your hands in the earlier part so you can make things better. But now when racist shit happens and I'm like, ooh, is that the choice you want to make? I feel comfortable because I can just kind of like make side eye and be
Mhm.
like, I don't think you want to do that, but no one will really listen to me because it's not my job. And then no one will ever ask me to answer for it either. And that's not optimistic, but I often think about the Pepsi commercial and somewhere out there was a black person who made a face like, ooh, I don't think we want to do this. And they all ignored it. And I don't know. I To answer your question, like I I I think about it a lot, and I honestly think these like white people who tend to be older and tend to be guys, like I think they honestly don't get it. Like I I think I think like when you're dealing with like when you're dealing with like the team owners and stuff, like I think because they've only ever had to listen to their own opinions, I think they really believe that everybody else thinks the same way they do.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that plus all of the other like years of like I don't know systemic racism that allows them to dismiss us so fast,
Mhm.
like just I think they're just like consistently reaffirmed that they're right.
Yeah, it's I've always been fascinated with the way certain people develop their outlook on life, and especially when you're talking about someone who like is a well-to-do white man, and the ones who they went to the right school, they have the right connections, they have the right family members, and like sometimes I just think like, can you imagine a life where like the only opposition to the things that you want to do are just yourself, like the people
Yeah,
who really truly believe that I can do anything as long as I put my mind to it, whereas like for the rest of the people in the world who aren't people like that, they have to face these sort of obstacles in the way. And sort of going back on your point about what to do and how to react if some racist shit happens at work. I think it's so funny that a lot of organizations will try to be like, okay, we have an Asian person, we have a black person, so we're diverse. But it's like when you were the lone person who is in that organization, who is representing your group or your community. It's like it's really not as easy as people think to just go up and be like, oh, this thing's happened, like this thing's racist, we need to do this, like, because you know that like it's not going to go over well.
Yeah.
And you know, like especially when you layer that on top of the already pre-existing workplace politics. Like if you already don't get along with your boss, how the hell are you going to go ahead and tell them that they're saying some problematic shit?
And like, yeah, and like also like when you're the only one, like the like you have to pick your battles,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like especially so again in television, like when I look back on my days in development, I remember really pushing hard for this like gender non-conforming character. Like I was like, there's this character can be whatever. Like they can treat gender like a spectrum. They can go by boy pronouns, girl pronouns, them pronouns. Like let's just like have this character, and it wasn't even a main character. Like it was such a like looking back on it, it was such a small thing, and I was really pushing hard to get this character to just like basically be allowed to wear a skirt at one point in time, and uh, I remember like I've been pushing for it for weeks, and then this white guy director who like nice guy and was coming from a nice place as so often of them are was work like who wasn't on the project came up and was like, but if we put that character in a skirt, won't others make fun of the character? And like his one comment, like low key undid 2 weeks of me like pushing for this character, and his comment was wrong, but I was like really like focusing on it. And then we had this other project, and there were no POCs in it, and the main characters were all like blonde, strawberry blonde, like super white. And I wanted to say something, but I about like those characters, but I didn't because like you can only do so much without being like labeled difficult or like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without being labeled difficult or angry or all the other labels people like to assign to black women. And I really had been working on this, getting this character in a skirt. It's so like small, but like I worked so hard to get this character in a skirt that I was like, okay, I'm just gonna hold my tongue on that one, and hopefully I can bring it up down the road once this character is safe. But like, yeah, like I don't think people understand like, and I think the companies that like hire us like pat themselves on the back and then don't really think about any of the like they don't think about what we're facing, and they just expect us like to because they've hired us to a be grateful but b like speak out.
Yeah, it's like they think that just the mere fact that you were on the team, that somehow um, that means that the final product had your stamp of approval on it, and that you were okay with the decisions, and that like, you know, and unfortunately, it just like, especially if your executives are a bunch of like white dudes, it's like, you know, sometimes like you can have all these ideas that you're pushing and advocating for, but if the people at the top just constantly say no, it's like it doesn't really matter how diverse your team is if your management isn't diverse, and if the people who actually have a final say on it don't want, you know, more inclusion, then it's just not going to happen. And I guess that that transitions well into um, another thing that you're working on, which are zines. You've sort of
Yeah.
been in the zine scene. First off, I'm curious, like what platforms are zines like really growing on? You know, have you completed any zines, and is there, you know, what's sort of the potential of this whole entire community?
Yeah, so Toronto has a very big scene. I think because they have a very big comic scene, comic like comic books, not well, also stand up, but comic book scene. Um so all the zines that I do so far are just like hard copy, like I print and sell at art fairs.
Mm-hmm.
Um but you like there's a lot of folks, a lot of artists on Instagram, um and like doing like blogs and things where they like post like they post their stuff, and a lot of collectives are doing zines together. Uh, there's this great group called Living Hyphen that deals with like hyphenated Canadians, like Trinidadian Canadian,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Um, and they just collect like stories and art pieces and publish them in like what is essentially a magazine. Um, and this very talented writer and artist, Whitney French, um, does a lot of like, well, does a lot in the zine community altogether, but a lot on like for like black zines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a place where I can like use my writing skills and just talk about my experiences. And a lot of it for me personally, it feels like I'm now taking my what used to be my Facebook rants and then just like distributing them out there. But
Uh-huh.
I find it like very therapeutic. Like I have like a 15-page zine where I just talk about the concept of like mixed race and what
Mm-hmm.
that means to me and how I feel like how the lens in which I get viewed when people see me as mixed versus like when they don't see me as mixed. Um, and then I also have one that's like, oh, this is like, well, actually no, I was gonna be like, this is so problematic, but it's about that. It's like my problematic love for Jar Jar Binks, and it's yeah, it's fun because like a lot of people again, I got into it. Oh, sorry, I dropped my mic for a second.
No worries.
Not good. A lot of people, a lot of people in like the my work, like in animation, draw and illustrate comics, and like I got into zines through there. Did another workshop because like I guess because I work with so many people who like studied art and like learned how to like self publish. So I had to like learn those skills like
Mm-hmm.
on the side sort of. Um, but yeah, mostly hard copies. I'm trying to get I'm trying to get to a place where I can post like where I have like a page where I post things. So I've created an Instagram account called Black Girl Magic the Gathering, and it's because I one of the projects I did was I repurposed. Do you know Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I repurposed these cards from the game and I collaged over them with important Black women um, that were that were important to me. So like one of them's my grandma, another one's Beyonce. Like it runs
Different
the
like
gamut.
iconic people and
Yeah, and so I'm gonna start posting those soon. Um, but yeah, it goes back to the interesting thing about zines is anyone can make it if you have access to paper, like and a
Mhm.
pen, and it gets better if you have access to a printer. But um, there are these like you can take one paper and fold it into a way that makes like these tiny booklets,
Mhm.
and so it's a way to like distribute and get your work out there. And of course, that's like really fun. But it goes back to what we were saying about like monetization,
Mhm.
because once you start making a lot of them, like you go to art I go to art fairs with my friends and I like sit at a table and I try to sell my work.
Mhm.
And that's always interesting because it's like you're pricing your own work and you spend a lot of time on this, but like you also want people to buy it. And then there's the added like layer of do I want people to buy it? Do I want certain people to buy it? Like
Mhm.
because I have these Black Girl Magic the Gathering cards, there is always at every zine fair, there is always like one white guy who's like, I mean, he like is gonna be so like, there's always this one guy that will like see them from afar and be like, Magic the Gathering, and like will be excited to tell you how to do your art better. Always. And like sometimes I'm like, do I want these people buying my shit? Sometimes
Yeah.
no, but also I want the money. But it's not even about money. Like I'm not making that much money. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. Like sometimes like I'll sell a lot of things and I feel really good about it. And sometimes I don't, like people don't buy my stuff, like it doesn't speak to them that day. And like I have to like kind of go back and remind myself that like I didn't get into this for money. I got into it because it was a way to express myself and I felt like I was being heard. when other people were reading it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it's that really is the tough thing about art, and especially art that you're actually making different products that people can go ahead and purchase, because you really have to make a ton of oddly simple but difficult decisions, like how you would actually price your work. And even just that alone, where you're thinking to yourself like, okay, I don't want to sell myself short, but I also don't want to price myself out to the point where like no one's going to spend this much money for the thing that I made.
yeah,
um and like there's a part of you that's like, okay, there's the stuff that it sells well, but there's also the stuff that I personally enjoy making more. Um, I mean, I commend anybody who makes art, not only just art physically, but also art that um, is sold. People who do this for a living, and I know that there are people who go to consistent art fairs and they're always out there. Like, how competitive is it? In terms of um, possibilities of being able to make this work as a viable source of income. Like, what is it like?
yeah. Uh, I mean, most people I know, like, and I've been doing it for about, like, I haven't been putting it online. I only started putting it online recently, but I've been going to these fairs and doing these things for about 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And most people I know don't make money to like live off there. Like, I think I know 3 people. Yeah, I know like 3 people who like do it as their main source of income.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and the rest are just like, they're all like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of what we were talking about before. Like, some of them work in coffee shops, some of them work in um, television jobs, some of like just run the gambit. Some of them do like a lot of side gigs. Uh, and of the 3 people, like one of them is kind of like internet famous. Like, Forever 21 stole her art and put it on a shirt. Yeah, I mean they all do
That's
it. Like,
happened a lot. I heard. I know that
yeah,
they do that.
all those stores do it.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause they all those stores like outsource their designs to like a company, and the company just grabs things and puts them on shirts. But
Mm-hmm.
so she hit like a certain level of fame because she was part of this group of artists that like did a lawsuit against Forever 21. In
Oh.
Canada, it's not in like you like they could only sue Forever 21 in Canada. They didn't sue
Oh,
like the
okay.
American one. Like, I don't know what becomes of it there, but yeah, like you have to like, and she's really talented. Not that the others are, not that everybody else isn't really talented. It's just that like she's very talented. Forever 21 stole some of her art and like got a bunch of like it kind of like between that and her media presence, like she's now able to sell like commission pieces.
Okay. Uh-huh. So it's a little
Uh,
bit better. And
yeah, but even still, like her partner has like a full time job and pays for a lot. So like I don't know.
so it's kind of like that same situation earlier, where it's like, like doing a side job or doing your artwork on the side, and monetizing it. Like, your ability to make money is oftentimes correlated to how much money you have to invest in the artwork that
Yeah,
you're creating.
and I think it's so frustrating sometimes because if like I believe that people should be paid for their art. I believe like everybody like likes to like dump on artists and like how they're jobless and penniless. And like the thing is, you should be paying people for their work. But the other thing I often think about is we like, and it goes back to all the other stuff we've talked about, like how much of it has been kind of like the narrative that's been sold to us growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But like, uh, so much of it, what am I trying to say? Like, we had that narrative of the struggling artist,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
even like the narrative of the successful artist, like my friend, who's like, again, lovely person. But when I think about it, like, uh, she she has the ability to go back home to her parents should she need to.
Mm-hmm.
But she has a partner who's also like paying a lot of the bills. And all of my friends that like went to art school, well, you talked about how expensive design school was. Like,
Oh yeah.
you like to be a struggling artist to some extent is a major privilege in America right now. Like,
Yeah.
you have to have a base to do that. And I'm consistently lucky because all of the ways like podcasting, zines, well, those two things, but all of those way, all